Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we'll be taking a look at the Great Depression, how this economic event impacted both the United States as well as the rest of the world. So let's get started. Following the First World War, we see that there is a major transitional state for the economy. Our big industries aren't making the profits that they once were expecting to keep making. And this is really just because of the transitions that were taking place in the United States at this time. Your railroads, they were losing out. Cars, mining, and lumber weren't in as high as demand as during the war. You don't need iron for guns if you are no longer at war as much. Even coal is going to start to lose out to hydroelectricity and petroleum reserves. The number of homes being built are going to start to slowly decline. It's still going to be increasing, but not to the level it had been during the industrial transitions. Farm life is never easy. Farm life has always been hard, and being a farmer is not an easy gig. During the wartime years, though, being a farmer isn't so bad because Uncle Sam was willing to buy up everything he got, and usually at a good cost. So a lot of these farmers during the war years, they take out loans expecting Uncle Sam to be there to buy it up because the war was initially expected to last another couple of years. But we got boots on the ground in 1917 and the war ends late 1918. The extra years that were expected to happen for World War I, they don't. And when the check comes for a lot of these farmers, they're not able to pay off the big loans they took on, expecting payday to keep coming. And this is really devastating to the farmers and the farming infrastructure in this country. There is some congressional help that is drawn up, and that is the McNary-Hagen bill, not necessarily to kill the debt that the farmers would have to pay, but it would push back when they would have to pay it all back. This legislation passed through House and Senate relatively easily, but when it got before the desk of the President Calvin Coolidge, it is stopped dead. Now, Coolidge argues that farmers had never needed help before from the federal government, so there's no reason they're going to need help now. It wasn't that he was necessarily against farmers. Coolidge was just pro-business, and that was all he saw it as. He saw it as another industry. This was pretty devastating both for the farmers, for food costs, for a lot of things, but it's a small step that we're going to see happen later. More and more people by the 1920s, mid-1920s, are buying what they need on credit. And if you find yourself in debt, this is a really slippery slope. You might find yourself thinking, I don't have to pay this back right now, so I'll just buy what I need and I'll take care of it later. But at the end of the 20s, more than 75% of Americans have a staggering amount of debt that is bad and will get much worse when things get worse. The best indicator of how good an economy is doing is the stock market, and the Dow Jones itself is really the barometer for how stocks work. And during the 1920s, generally speaking, the stock market was growing. If you had money in the market, you're probably going to be making money off the market. If you are seeing international growth, international trade, interstate trade, that's all going to be growing at this time. So during the 20s, the growth of the market means that economically things are going good. And this was really indicative of how good the Dow was doing. It had jumped 300 points in 5 years. Now, 300 points now it's nothing, but this meant, well, in 1924, the Dow had a score of 81, and by 1929, it was 381. Millions and millions of people have money in the market expecting to make money back. The problem is that the market is not this stable place. It doesn't have any oversight. There's no federal control over it. So if you wanted to maybe lie about how good your business is doing, there's no one to look over you and say, hey, your company really isn't worth $1 billion. It's only worth $100,000. And people would invest in a company expecting big payouts. And more of this is happening. And with it happening so much, and with so much in the market falsely, we can only see things are going to turn downhill very quickly. The confidence in the market started to slip in late 1929. On October 24th, 29, the market takes a giant plunge. And this shook a lot of people's confidence in how bad things were going to get. And it really took it downhill on October 29th, 1929, as people are less and less sure about how good the market is doing, how good the stock market is. They start to pull money out of the market. And this leads to the crash. The crash takes place because the market had been so artificially expanded. It had been blown up essentially because of how much money was in it. Think about it like a balloon. There was a lot of extra cash in the market, but just like a balloon, if I put a lot of air into a balloon, the balloon gets bigger, but it gets less stable. This is kind of like what the stock market is doing. It's very big, but it's not very stable. And when when money starts to come pouring out of the market, well, it's like we just pop our balloon and it just flies around the room. By the first days of November, over $30 billion had been lost in the market. And this was the triggering event of the Great Depression. You might think, well, if I don't have money in the market, then I should be okay, right? Well, not necessarily or at all. You see, banks put money in the markets as well. It's not uncommon. Heck, this happens kind of today where a bank will invest, usually this happens with mortgages, in something that they will make money off of. And it's not seen as too bad because, well, nowadays the money is insured, but even back then, there's a lot of money in that vault. We can invest a little bit of it. It's not like everyone's going to want their money back tomorrow. Fast forward to 1929, and everybody wants their money back that day. You see, this is a time where the bank's money, your money in the bank, is not secured in any way. It's in a vault, but that's about it. There's no way to say your money is there. And if somebody went in and robbed the bank, they're not just robbing from the building, they are taking your money out. So because a lot of these banks had invested lots into the market, and then that money wasn't worth anything, people get nervous, they get scared, they want their money out of their bank. They go down to the bank and they find a long line of other people who also wanted their money out of the bank. You get to the front of the line and the teller says, we don't have any money left. All the money is gone, your money is gone, and this building is about to be foreclosed upon. The bank won't even exist anymore. 600 banks closed in this crash. There used to be a Bank of the United States of America. It does not exist anymore because of this crash. And when banks go out, well, we can start to see the trickling effect. Loans aren't issued, businesses are going to close down, and 1 out of every 4 people are going to find themselves without a job. Internationally, the Great Depression affected other nations as well. The United States, able to produce, foodstuffs and finished stuffs, can't sell this stuff anymore. It becomes too expensive to ship it internationally. So international trade also starts to go downhill. People start losing their cities or people start losing their jobs in the cities. They find themselves living anywhere they can. In some cases, shanty towns are built, like in this picture, just shacks of stuff that's put together to make a little shanty town, and it's just made out of garbage. You might stand in line for a couple hours for a piece of bread and a cup of, let's call it soup. You're just as likely to dig through garbage and find something. You might sleep in one of these shanty towns, you might sleep under a bridge or in a park. We see a giant rise in racism as well at this point in American history. The KKK, which was functionally gone, comes back, and that's never good. Now, as bad as this is in the cities, in the countryside, we see an ecologic disaster that's just as bad. Without practicing good crop management and soil management, we see this disaster called the Dust Bowl. And how it works essentially is the topsoil becomes destable from the ground beneath it. Giant windstorms start coming in, and ordinarily this is the time that you just take your family into the root shelter, or maybe into a cellar, or maybe into a storm area of your house. You let it blow through, and then you go outside, assess the damage, and that's that. But these storms were so bad, and the soil was so unstable, the storm blows in and it blows the topsoil away, and that means it's also blowing the seeds away and everything growing in the soil. You'd walk outside and find the soil level of your farm gone. It's just down to the hard packed clay underneath. Your livelihood is gone. If you're caught outside in one of these storms, it could be fatal. For kids, this was not good for children. There's no health care. There's no mandatory school systems. There's no farms. So for a lot of kids, they go back to work. Child labor was starting to disappear at this time, but it has to come back because there's really nowhere else for these kids to go to. Some people refer to this time period for kids as the lost generation, the group of kiddos who they had nowhere else to go and they lost their childhood. President at the time, Herbert Hoover, he believed that the federal government did not need to actively get involved in what happened. This is a great difference between him and the man who will follow him, FDR. You see, Hoover said that Americans were going to be just fine. He believed in this idea of rugged individualism, that if they just pulled themselves up and gave it their all, then everybody would be just fine. Now, this is a good idea you might have. You want to say, like, people need to find their own place in the world, and a little bit of hard work never hurt anybody. But this is a time where one out of every 4 Americans is unemployed, and has been for the last few years. This is not the attitude you need at this time. You need active leadership. There are some things that start to happen at this time to help alleviate the problems. One of those is the construction of Boulder Dam, which is in this picture. Think of it as the baby brother of Hoover Dam. It was a great dam. It provided electricity and flood control, and it provided a lot of jobs too. You see, you don't need a lot of hard engineering knowledge to pour concrete or to drive a truck. You needed to figure out, okay, where's the concrete go? How deep do the structure need to go? Where's the foundational lines? That kind of stuff. But the day-to-day construction, you just need manpower for that. The kind of thing that you can get 1,000 people who don't have a job and put them to work on this. Hoover continues, however, to lose cooperation, and people continue to not trust him. His name starts becoming a pejorative. If you're cold, you wrap yourself in a Hoover blanket. If you're shantytown, that starts being known as the Hooverville. All these ideas generally are the idea of what people are looking at their president. The best thing that the federal government as a whole tried to do was Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And the goal of this was to actively get the economy under the control of the federal government. This was super ambitious, but it did not work, and it did not do anything special at all. And the problems and events of the Bonus Army really did end things for Hoover. See, back in World War I, the federal government had put together an offer. They needed soldiers, and they needed them really fast. See, drafts can work, but if you signed up, you were given a cash award. Think of it like a bonus if you signed up. If you signed up, you'd get $500 given to you or a surviving member of your family in 1945. Not a bad idea. It definitely got people interested. And in 1932, anywhere from 10 to 20,000 vets went to DC as people who had signed up early and said, "We want the money now." And this started becoming a really good bit of legislation. It was knocked around by Walter Waters, and it became known as the Patman Bill. The goal of it was very simple. Take the money these guys would have gotten in 1945, give it to them now. This would generate faith in the federal government, as well as some money for recovery. These are good ideas. Hoover, however, dithered on whether or not to do anything about this. He was worried that these individuals were communists, that they were crazy, that they were thieves, and for a while it looked like he wasn't going to do anything, but finally he did sign this. And after he signed it and people started getting money, a lot of them started leaving our nation's capital. A couple thousand of them stick around for a variety of reasons, but Hoover is worried that things are going to get worse, so he calls the army in to disband them. And this wasn't just the army showing up and saying, "Okay, move along, get out of here." This was tactical riot gear that was used against American citizens. It was tear gas, rubber bullets, real bullets, Molotov cocktails, and this picture depicts the Hooverville, that was in our nation's capital, that was burning down because of the riots. And you can see our nation's capital in the background. It's crazy to think that this was orchestrated by the president and carried out by high-ranking members of the army. The results of this: 1,000 people gassed, a couple of children go blind, a couple of people are shot. Hoover's image never gets better. And it's so bad that Republicans are not going to be elected to the office of the presidency for the next couple decades. And the transitional, how are we going to fix this, is addressed by FDR, the man who took direct action through the New Deal. But that's a story for another time. My last slide I want to leave you with is this one. See, we talk about how much different things cost during the Great Depression versus today. And there's a variety of reasons of why these costs went up so much, but kind of a yowza moment for how much all this is. So, today we talked about the Great Depression. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.